friends, in the first part of the lecture discussion, Professor Payal Nagpal has given important central details of this character and the conflicts that she faces and goes through. So in the second part, I think lots of questions have already been raised, and she'll expand upon them. But I start with the simple query as to how she's presented not as a woman, as a person, but as a soul, as if the soul defines her inner being, and she is not a housemaid she is, but he calls her a soul. So there is a kind of dignity about her. So what do you say
actually
about that?
I think he deliberately uses the word soul here because of her turn towards Christianity, towards the latter part of her life, and how she feels. And there's a parrot that she really she kind of has in the house. Lulu, the parrot, and it's almost like that parrot is like a child for her, like a son to her. And uh, it's and then she almost looks at it like a Christian connection. So between the parrot and the Holy Ghost. So all this, the simplicity of her mind, the breadth of her thinking is very simple. It's not complex. It's not layered. He's telling us that. And she defines her life primarily in terms of the household chores that she has to perform, and in terms of some relationships that give her a sense of identity, give her a sense of being. Like one with her, one is with the children, but then the children go away. That's Paul in Virginia. So she thinks about her nephew, and then after the nephew, it's the parrot. So it's some kind of an instinct in her. One could call it a maternal instinct, but her identity in this household is through the chores and through these people. Again, in the next part of this story, for instance, they stop by at the farm of one of the people who works for Madame Aubé. That's the Lebart farm. Now this has an ancient appearance. How it's now moldy. The walls are black, windows are grey with dust, the oak sideboard filled with all sorts of utensils, plates, pitchers. So we get a complete insight into the life of, let's say, somebody like Felicity, the life of the Lebards. And again, this is something that realism can be credited with, that it gives us a complete overview of the way in which people from different social groups live their lives, what their houses look like, and so on. So with this, one moves actually again to the church, and the church is also described in some detail about the stalls of the choir, the priest who stands behind the reading desk, the Holy Ghost hovered over the Virgin, and so on and so forth. So this evokes some kind of soulfulness, if one may say, in Felicity. Felicity evoked paradise, the flood. She thinks about all the things that the Bible tells her. So the Tower of Babel, the blazing cities, dying nations, shattered idols, and she had listened to the Passion, she wept. So this is the time that one sees her extremely emotional, if one can use that word, and she wonders, why had they crucified Christ, who loved little children and nourished the people, made the blind see, who out of humility had wished to be born among the poor in a stable. So this humility, this soulfulness, and the simplicity is something that defines Felicity.
For instance, as you say, she has been represented as a kind of symbol of basic affection that human beings have, and that is what Christianity is for her. And there is a parrot, and the parrot is known for its tongue, for its talk, for its simplicity and honesty. And maybe the parrot also is a kind of symbol, symbolizing her simplicity and depth. And you refer to the Holy Ghost and that kind of presence, in the atmosphere, and she also has a presence. I think she controls basically not just the family but the outside world.
Well, Felicity probably. I mean, I'm not too sure about the controlling, because it's her own self vis-a-vis the church. That for instance, by looking at all this, when Virginia goes there, that's how she learns. As Flaubert says, her catechism, her religious education, having been neglected in her youth, and so she imitated all of Virginia's religious practices. All the things that Virginia would do, she would do. She would fast when she did. She would go for confession. At Corpus Christi Day, you know, they both decorated the altar. So, and when Virginia has her first communion, you know, she fusses around about the shoes and everything, and her reactions are pretty much the same as that of Virginia. So there is a sense of identification, and the church is giving her that identity, and uh, in a sense reinforcing her belief in that humbleness and her belief in a very simple life. So finally, when Virginia actually leaves the household and she's sent off to the Ursulines for further education, you know, she's left feeling very, very sad, because she all her time would go with, you know, kind of taking care of Paul and Virginia, apart from the other household chores. So she would enter Virginia's room, just look at the walls. She missed combing her hair, lacing her shoes. So all the things that she actually did for Virginia, she would miss performing them. And this is where, you know, she then thinks about interacting with her nephew. So Flaubert, you know, it's one of the critics, Matson, says that perhaps the tone of the work may be tentatively described as one of sad serenity or ironic resignation. Flaubert views his simple-minded main character and her peculiar deity with some irony, but at the same time, he's fond enough of her to include in his narrative scenes that are almost tenderly conceived. And it is this all-inclusiveness, you know, there is objective realism, there is a bit of gentle irony, and there is unsentimental compassion. But all this, Matson says, leads to the work of a richness and mature complexity, and all this is impressive. So it would be a mistake to actually think that he's being harshly ironic by calling her a simple soul, giving that title to the tale. But this title is borne out. This title is borne out in the course of you know, the tale. So Victor is the new character who appears, and you know, his parents keep putting pressure on Victor to, we get to know from the narration about how you know, they want him to get something or the other from the Aubé household, maybe some little bit of sugar, soap, brandy, something. And on one particular occasion, and the date is clearly mentioned, it's 14th of July 1819. So we've already reached 1819. Victor has to depart on a merchant vessel, and she's very upset about it, and you know,
1890, when Flaubert is not there.
1819. Yeah, 1819,
okay,
yes.
okay.
1819. And this is when the restoration has taken place, the Bourbon restoration has taken place in France. So the years are clearly mentioned, but Flaubert leaves it to the reader to map the human behavior against the historical events. It's not something that he explicitly brings in, but you know, but we know there are indications, there are hints that are given, but the years are very specifically mentioned. So 1819, there is a merchant vessel, you know, and he was going to go to Honfleur and join his sailor. He was going to be away for 2 years, and so there's this interesting bit about how his previous trips had not worried her, you know, because these trips were to England and Brittany, but now he's going to America and the colonies and the islands. So it's interesting, we've had the Bourbon restoration, and now there is a merchant vessel that is going to America and the colonies and the islands. And she feels that this is, of course, you know, some uncertain part of the world, and she only thinks about her nephew. So there is something very strangely, you know, similar now about the two women. All this while we've been talking about Felicity, and Madame Aubin is in the background, but both women define their identity in terms of the children, and both women, you know, consider that to be a kind of certitude in their life. So
there are 2 points you are making.
Yes.
So let me think about the first point. The kind of being that she represents in the story, isn't that a comment on the society of the time?
Yes, it certainly is.
The 2 are antagonistic, in fact.
Yes, yes. It certainly is. The 2 are absolutely antagonistic, and you actually mentioned this very clearly. And at one point in this tale, it's very clearly borne out that, you know, where there is this cab that almost runs her over. So the way the world has turned so very competitive and has become almost barbaric in its approach is something that is borne out. And against all of this stands Felicity with her simplicity.
And the second point is regarding, it's a slightly distancing yourself from the antagonism, because finally the class division becomes less, and there is a kind of understanding that is evolving between her mistress and herself. So the woman part, the feminist part, is asserted at a different level when she is one with the mistress.
So actually, there are 2 points here. One is that initially she is not. And for instance, when when she loses her nephew, the nephew dies, and she's not as concerned. And so, for instance, when when Felicity has not received any information, any letter from Victor, so the madam asks, she says, I haven't had any news since 6 months. From whom? And the servant replied gently, why, from my nephew. So she says, yes, your nephew. And shrugging her shoulders, Madame Aubé continued to pace the floor as if to say, I did not think of it. Besides, I do not care. A cabin boy, a pauper. But my daughter, what a difference, just think of it. Felicity too thinks, she too reinforces this, although she had been reared roughly, was very indignant, and then she forgot about it. It appeared quite natural to her that one should lose one's head about Virginia. And the 2 children were, even though they were of equal importance to Felicity, for Madame Aubé, while she's waiting for some information of Virginia, it does not matter, as the narrative tells us that, she considers this person to be a pauper, so it's not really important. So here these are 2 very different aspects. And Felicity's simplicity is again seen when she asks someone to explain on a world map as to where, Victor has gone. And then she suddenly says that, maybe the person could also describe the house in which Victor lived. And so everybody laughs and is delighted at the ignorance of this particular simple soul. So where there are 2 different approaches that Madame Aubé and Felicity have here. When she gets to know about Victor's death, Felicity reached the 2nd floor, and she caught sight of Virginia lying on her back with clasped hands, her mouth open and her head thrown back. This is Virginia's death. And Madame Aubé lay at the foot of the couch, clasping it with her arms. And Felicity never lets go of, whatever has to be done for Virginia when Virginia dies. Felicity is there throughout. And she does all the things, that probably nobody else could have done for her. And it is in this moment, both women face a loss. So Felicity loses her nephew, Victor, and we have Madame Aubé, who loses her daughter. And she does not leave sight of Madame Aubé or Virginia. So, but in this moment, they are one. And this is the moment when Madame Aubé actually hugs her and gives her a kiss. And that is the moment when all the moment of loss dissolves all the class boundaries. But this is only one moment. And, in a sense, they kind of get back to their different class positions, so to say. So this is how. So there are moments when class is asserted, and there are moments when, it's not. So.
And how about the problem that she faces regarding matrimony? That's also asserted quite well, as you pointed out earlier.
Yes, that she's left in a lot of debt, and she has to sell off everything because of her husband's, ways.
What is her view of marriage, Felicity's?
It's actually, Felicity does not think about marriage, and Flaubert, I think, has presented to us here a community of women, actually. So it's Madame Aubé and Felicity. The men that we have here, for instance, Theodore is there, he's out, and anybody that, the only the man again who stays on is Paul. But Paul is also, outside of this space, the family space of that is inhabited by Madame Aubé and Felicity. In fact, he could not follow any profession. He was absorbed in drinking. His mother paid his debts, and he made fresh ones. and the sighs that she heaved while she knitted at the window reached the ears of Felicity, who was spinning in the kitchen. So, one woman is spinning in the kitchen, one woman is knitting at the window, uh, one woman is trying to make her life, and then there is Madame Aubin, who's only paying debts that she's incurring because of the men in her life, first the husband and then the son. So I think Flaubert is saying a lot about the institution of marriage here, and not just the husband, but also being a mother is not one of the simplest things, and being a mother to a son who's absorbed in drinking. So it's not, and at this moment, and I'd like to just read this out, their eyes met and filled with tears. At last the mistress opened her arms, and the servant threw herself against her breast, and they hugged each other, and giving vent to their grief in a kiss, which equalized them for a moment. So Flaubert clearly, in this tale, both experience loss, and both are, in a sense, repaying some debt that they have incurred. And in that sense, maybe Felicity, because she does not have any children, is not going through that. But this is where there is a momentary dissolving of class identities.
Since you have talked about this, coming together and a kind of closeness between two women who belong to different classes, you used a phrase. I want to understand that also in the context. The phrase "community of women." What exactly is that in the story?
So the male characters are all outside this particular household. I mean, Paul is there as long as he's there as a son who's growing up, but they all go away. And what we have here is this household comprises Madame Aubin and Felicity. So there is nobody else. And Theodore, who is Felicity's husband, is not there in the picture.
And Virginia?
And Virginia, of course, she dies. So Virginia is there, but she's sent off for further education and she dies. So we are left with these women, and there is no other impact that is to be seen. We see them as victims of a patriarchal society, of course, but they are women who are fighting back. They are women who are also asserting. I wouldn't want to see them only as victims, because even someone, a simple soul like Felicity, for instance, defines herself, be it Paul and Virginia initially, or be it her nephew, and now coming to the last part of this story is the parrot Lulu. She teaches him how to speak a few words, and all day long the parrot is saying only those 3 or 4 words, but she's constantly talking to this parrot. Over a period of time, she cannot hear, and she becomes deaf, and when there is again a year that is mentioned. The year is now 1837, when Lulu the parrot, this parrot on one occasion just kind of, flies away, and she just roams around everywhere trying to look for this parrot. And she never gets over that nervousness and that sense of loss. When the parrot disappears, the parrot, of course, immediately the parrot is back. But in 1837, so this parrot is dead, and it's hanging to the wire bars with his head down.
1837.
1837. So
yes.
here again, we've entered 1830 July monarchy. We've entered a different decade altogether. So now around this time,
typical Flaubert.
Yes, absolutely typical Flaubert. And now at this point in 1837, one part is the death of Lulu the parrot. Another important aspect is, and I'd like to just quickly read out a few lines here. Behind her, in a cloud of dust, impelled by the steep incline, a mail coach drawn by galloping horses advanced like a whirlwind. And when she was walking in the middle of the road, she could not hear. But this driver is not sympathetic towards her, and he stood up in his seat and shouted to her. And when he could not hold back, he accelerated his pace. And the two leaders were almost upon her. With a jerk of the reins, he threw them to one side. He lifted his big whip and lashed her from her head to her feet with such violence that she fell to the ground and was unconscious. And she realizes that blood is flowing from her cheek. This is a moment that's been talked about by a lot of critics, and it almost makes it appear as if this is the moment that reflects how from the early 19th century to the late 1830s the world has become probably more brutal and less sympathetic. But it is women like Felicity who are probably holding fort by retaining their humbleness, by retaining their goodness. So, to just...
Which gave a challenge to the brutality outside.
Yes, which gave
And
a challenge.
so you fight, brutality with humility.
Yes.
And that there is a kind of Christian depth there, which is found only in the masses, common people, and particularly women.
Yes. So if we look at Paul's career, then a notary's clerk, tax collector, all these are mentioned in great detail in a lot of the fiction of this particular period, and how he's gradually becoming more and more insensitive to the requirements of his mother or Felicity. Initially, of course, he gets a lot of gifts for Felicity also, but gradually adulthood in a sense and life means something entirely different. We come to the 1850s, towards the end of this particular tale, where Madame Aubé dies in 1853, and immediately after her death there is a plan to sell off everything, and Felicity is so scared that she doesn't know what is going to happen to her. So her eyesight grows very dim. She does not make any demands on Paul because she thinks that if she asks for something, they might sell off this house, which is supposed to be sold, but for some reason, it's not explained, but for some reason this house is not sold. Now the only thing that she hangs on to is Lulu the parrot who had died, but she had got this parrot stuffed. So,
he's still there.
the parrot is still there for her, and so when there is going to be a celebration, the altar is going to be in Madame Aubé's yard, and the one thing, she has nothing else to contribute. So the one thing she contributes is Lulu, the stuffed parrot now. And if we really speaking look at just the last part, how when she's dying, when she exhaled her last breath, she thought she saw in the half-opened heavens a gigantic parrot hovering above her head. And of all the persons and things that she loved, the only thing that life, permitted her to keep was the stuffed parrot, stuffed worm-eaten parrot by now. And so her humility was great, as Matson points out, and she's devoutly religious to a simple soul like hers. There is nothing strange or irreverent in the fact that the Holy Ghost and the stuffed parrot, they merge in her imagination, which means the heavenly and the earthly, they are together in her imagination. And this is the end when she dies. So she's given up the stuffed parrot to be placed at the altar, and it looks like a the head is popping, it looks like a jewel. But in her depths, for her, what she had, whatever appeared to her to be soulful, and whatever appeared to be soulful in this earth, which is Lulu the parrot, I think that kind of merges in her imagination. And as explained, that there is nothing cataclysmic that is going to happen here. Here is a life that is a simple life of an ordinary woman, life of a working class woman. She's a house help, and how from the beginning to her death, everybody around except for Paul is alive, but Paul again is outside of this household. Now the house is decaying, but she cannot ask for anything, and Felicity continues her life in that particular house and meets her death there.
Would you like to comment on the word Felicity for her as a name?
Yes, certainly. The one thing that she is denied, because she does not know, I think the gentle irony, if one wants to locate, for me, I think it's located more in her name than in the title of this tale, because it would be, as mentioned earlier, it would probably not be appropriate to think that Flaubert is being harshly ironic in calling her a simple soul, because indeed she is. The way she is kind of hit by the person who's holding the whip tells us that the world has changed, it's become more brutal, but she remains the simple soul, and yet her name is Felicity. So we need to ask, does she know what genuine happiness is? What does she look, where does she look for happiness? She looks for happiness in human relationships, in relationships with Madame Aubé, her children, her nephew, Lulu the parrot, the stuffed parrot. These are things that she gets happiness in, and this happiness is very different from the way the world is fast changing from 1809 to about 1850s in the context of France.
In 2 minutes, could you sum it up?
Yes. So a simple soul should be looked at as a tale about an ordinary woman. We look at visual art and see how the big canvas was being used to depict the ordinary. Similarly, the structure of the tale is being used by Flaubert to depict a very ordinary life. If there is irony, then this irony is very, very gentle. And at the same time, in 1870s, where the meaning of realism itself was changing, I think an important takeaway here is for us to understand how Flaubert's writing is deliberate and is telling us that this is what realism is all about. I think by the end of this tale, we get to know the life of a simple soul. We get to know the way in which lived lives, their houses, everything changed, and the way history itself, the different shifting points that are there, we get to know about those too. So,
Friends, at the end, Professor Payal Nagpal has summed it up as a tale which has compassion, which has felicity as a word, and that the whole thing is built around a character which may not be the case in the novels of Flaubert, but here it seems to be a kind of a biography of the character that is presenting, and it's a characterized kind of a tale that Flaubert attempted, and so successfully. So that I think is the point that Professor Payal Nagpal has made, and in great detail, and she has, in a way, presented this character in a concrete form that the author himself aimed at. So with these words, I think we come to the end of the story. I hope you have enjoyed the discussion, the point that Professor Payal Nagpal made, and think more about it in one's own circumstance, in your own circumstance, as to how women survive, because they have that kind of inner self, guiding them all the time. Thank you.